We have new blood here for the New England Take. I'm extremely excited to welcome Dexter Tarbox to the program. He's going to be writing sometimes for the site. He's going to be maybe doing his own videos here in the not too distant future. But either way, let's talk to him and his first article that is available now at the newenglandtake.com. It's the New England Take. I'm your host, AJ Kierstead. Definitely be sure to check out the newenglandtake.com and go to YouTube at New England Take. If you go search for that on there, or youtube.com/at New England Take, you'll be able to check out all our videos there. Everything is done as video now for the show. Please be sure to like, subscribe, and all that YouTube nonsense. Welcome, Dexter, to the show.
Hey AJ, great to be joining you.
Yeah, so let's start off and have you talk a little bit about yourself, and primarily, at least for the reason why you're going to be joining my little program here, is because you're political writing.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name's Dexter Tarbox Jr. I'm a political commentator from Seacoast, New Hampshire. And yeah, so my first piece has just come out on New England Take, as you mentioned. I've published in a few other journals around the area, including recently some pieces on the Donald Trump indictment and other issues related to New England and New Hampshire in particular.
That's great. Yeah, we still want to have a bit of a New England focus on here, so that's the big reason why you want to check out the newenglandtake.com is we try and wrap it back around at least the way we think about it up here. Not everything is always about what's going on the national stage, but of course we're starting off with the first one here, more of an international stage, but it's very important, especially in New England with the opioid crisis that's been, as much as it's been forgotten by those in DC, it is still going on like no one would believe. I mean, we always hear about the little pockets of what's going on in California with Skid Row and everything like that, how it's expanded, the streets of New York, streets of Chicago, everything like that. But there's some more systemic things going on.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's very deeply connected to New England and New Hampshire, this problem, especially when you consider it in the lens of the president's most recent trip, which was to our northern border rather than the southern to discuss this issue. So let me say, I discussed this a little bit in greater detail in my piece for newenglandtake.com. But why don't I give you a little bit of the background here? So Biden did make this state visit to Canada last week. And he decided there that it was finally time to propose some action on fentanyl, led by this new global United States Canada coalition. And this is kind of perplexing, of course, because the Canadian border is only responsible for about 2% of the total amount of fentanyl that we've seized. And meanwhile, during that kind of begrudging trip he took in January to visit the Mexican border, where that remaining 98% gets interdicted. He looked over this sterilized sort of Potemkin village, where they swept the homeless and the migrants off the streets of San Antonio. And then he sort of dementedly mistook members of the Salvation Army for the Secret Service and didn't really make much substantial policy comment while he was there. So the irony, of course, of him addressing this now when he's in Canada, which is responsible for the 2%, it would be incomplete without a healthy dose of hypocrisy being mixed in as well. So during this same Canadian trip that he took, Biden decided to accuse House Republicans of attempting to slash funding for border security. And he called it a move that could allow nearly 900 pounds of fentanyl into our country. This, of course, despite the fact that it was the Democrats who rejected a proposed amendment to increase border funding during negotiations on the omnibus funding bill. Of course, what's more, it was the Biden administration who sued Arizona, forcing them to tear down the makeshift border wall that they had built, just among a whole host of other measures that make any assertion that he has a concern for illegal activity at the border completely laughable. Let alone this assertion that New Hampshire's, as we said, rather serious fentanyl problem is due to our border with Quebec and not Mexico. So that's the gist of what I sought to highlight in this piece.
There's so many. There's like worms everywhere issues of that, just the can has exploded, and there's just the worms are on the ceiling, they're on the floor, they're on the wall, and we're like, oh God, is it the demented old man that now runs this country that the Democrats keep propping up, saying he's in control, he knows exactly what's going on. I had Paul Hodes on the show, which was a fascinating character study of what happens with establishment Democrats with that interview. And then you look at what's going on with realistically where the drugs are coming from, which is 100% the southern border, because literally every Democrat along the southern border, except for California at this point, has now come to the national stage to say, hey, we have big problems and you guys aren't helping us and we don't know what to do. And even the Democrats are beginning to help push migrants north of their states because they don't have a place for any of these people, and the tremendous amount of crime of people that have nowhere to go, that were trafficked into this country, just going, oh, I guess I gotta find a job. Well, guess what? There's no jobs available.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's a bipartisan issue, especially for the communities that are most affected either by the traffic of migrants or the traffic of drugs. And again, that as you say, is the southern border. So this just sort of ridiculous paradox of announcing this coalition in Canada, and trying to set the blame there is just beyond belief. And I'll tell you, I do have some suspicions for the reasoning. I talk mostly in the article just about sort of the irony that's happening here. But this was a rather substantial state visit. So announcing the coalition against fentanyl at this time and in this place, I don't think it was a traditional Biden gaffe. I don't think this was pure dementia on display. This was something that's planned. And when you think about, unlike his predecessor, Biden doesn't write his own tweets. So when he ridiculously starts blaming the GOP on Twitter, that's intentional. That's something that was done by his comms team, the same way developing this announcement in Canada was done. So again, it's something that seems rather intentional. And since it does seem, as I say, that he intended to make this point in a way that utterly minimizes the role of Mexico, almost completely ignores it, I suspect that it's all in service, likely, to his overall open borders policy. Biden and the left, they see rampant immigration, especially illegal immigration, as a political and a philosophical winner. Not only for the electoral reasons, but because changing the cultural and demographic makeup of the country aligns with their ideology. As just generally to the idea of open borders and a globalist perspective on the world, and particularly on North and South America relations. So I believe that when Biden weighs the cost of fentanyl against the perceived benefit of open borders, he finds it to be an acceptable exchange. And I think that's why he's ignoring the issue. Now, obviously, he has to maintain this pantomime of concern. And that's why we see this ridiculous display in Canada that to anyone who's reasonably looking at the problem knows it makes no sense.
It's also it's extraordinarily cynically a culture war cash in also, because he cannot for the life of him say anything negative about the people coming across the southern border, because he would be pegged by the establishment and far left Democrats as being a racist. I mean, there's no way around it. He can go up to Canada, say whatever the hell he wants, and him and his little lefty buddy up there, Trudeau, are going to go, we got to stop the drugs from going across the border. Just the fentanyl, though. And just let's forget about the heroin's coming in through the southern border also, which is also a tremendous issue. And all the pills that are coming across the damn southern border and completely glossed over. We're going to focus on fentanyl because that's extremely more deadly and easy way of capitalizing on issues that people are having going on. Meanwhile, glossing over the homelessness crisis that is partially stemmed from this tremendous drug issue we have in this country, the employment issue that leads to homelessness, that leads to further mental health crises for individuals because they're no longer able to get any assistance, because guess what? They don't have health care in this country at that point. I'm sure at some point the two of us will have discussions about health care. We most likely disagree on a fair bit with that, since people on the right can't come to an agreement when it comes to health care, generally speaking. So it's always a fascinating conversation when that happens. So we will have that at some point. But It's totally a cynical way of just capitalizing I believe, on the social issues that we have in this country, which also, by the way, the golden child across the Pacific Ocean for the Democrats that we've magically forgotten about, that, oh, by the way, produces the fentanyl that ends up in this country. China, nowhere to be seen or mentioned in any of this, because the Democrats are buddy buddy with China. To make sure no one thinks I'm a hypocrite, the Republicans are just as terrible with their buddying up with Russia. Make no mistake, I have been 100% consistent on that. The Republicans are way too buddy buddy with Russia and a lot of those Eastern European countries. The Democrats, it's the same thing with China.
Well, meanwhile, China and Russia are palling up to each other and laughing at us both.
Yes.
And cynical. I think you said exactly the right word for it here. It's a cynical position, because as sort of as you mentioned as well, whether it's heroin, whether it's fentanyl, whether it's other drugs, fentanyl is a convenient buzzword for Biden
Yes.
when he brings it up. It's not a meaningful position he has on it. Again, this is sort of play acting for him that he has concern. Meanwhile, he's throwing the doors open to serve his larger agenda at the southern border. So the idea of mentioning fentanyl at all, of doing this in Canada, it is all designed to put on a sort of performance in service of the greater agenda, because he knows he has to tackle this issue or at least address the issue in words to a certain extent, and that's why I say cynicism is a great way to conceptualize this, because that's what it is. It's a political tool that he's using.
And another issue that Biden will definitely have if he tries to address it at the southern border is, guess what? It's not just drugs coming across for these individuals; it's also the human traffickers. So going back to a previous point that we were also discussing is, if he goes hog wild against the fentanyl coming across the southern border, he's going to need to lock down the border, which means he's going to stop the migrant traffic. He's going to slow down. He's going to cause it to slow down even more than it already has down there, which has led to a couple months ago, a truck full of migrants cooking to death essentially
Yeah.
inside the back of a tractor trailer. The fire that happened late last week at a migrant facility in the Mexico side of the border, which, guess what? That disappeared from the headlines very quickly because it was caused by the inmates inside the facility. And the guards, overstretched and probably not making jack, said, screw this, we're leaving.
And that he can't do. He can't crack down on the southern border because that's not serving what his actual end is ultimately here. Actually taking measures that would meaningfully impact the traffic of fentanyl and other drugs into the country is something he can't do yet, precisely because it would require him closing down the border, massively increasing our patrol of the southern border. And again, that's something that he is not willing to do, not only because I think it serves his deeper agenda, but also, as you said, it will be perceived by many of the people who he needs on the far left as a racist move, or otherwise xenophobic. And so it's absolutely not something that he wants to do, nor could he politically afford to do.